Good evening. This is July 11th. This is The People Are One and the Same. You're going to notice really quick that there's a little different format than we've been having for the earlier part of this year. My co-host, John Choi, is embroiled in his parades, and so he wanted some time off on Friday night. So I have a co-host with me tonight, my Chief Judge, Tracy Warner. Good evening, Tracy.
Hello, Gary. Nice to be here.
How are things going with you?
Things are going very well. Happy to be here. I think this is the second or third time that I've actually subbed for John as a co-host on the show. I'm happy to be here. It's a great opportunity for me to visit with you, visit with our guest. I'm excited to talk to Judge Miles here in a minute. But I appreciate being on the show. I think this is an excellent opportunity to talk about the court system, to get people to know a little bit about what we do as judges and really who we are as people. So I'm happy to be here.
I would be remiss if I didn't tell people it's a live studio. We actually have bodies in the studio, and it's also a live telephone line. So if you're watching on July 11th, you can call 747-3838 to ask questions of any one of us, of the three. So let's get going with our guest. If you want to introduce our Judge out of Washington County.
I'd be happy to. Thanks, Gary. With us this evening for this, as Judge Bastian said, this live television show is our colleague from the East, Judge Susan Miles, who is a 10th Judicial District Judge chambered in Stillwater, Minnesota. Many of you who know me know that my background is as a prosecutor in Washington County. Judge Miles was elected to the bench in Stillwater, about a year and a half, 2 years before I was appointed a judge in Ramsey County. Goes by residency. So I have known Judge Miles for 18 years. I had the honor of appearing before her as a lawyer in Washington County when she was just a baby judge. But it's been about 18 years now. And this is the Ramsey Washington County cable network. And I know Judge Bastian, Judge Choi, or John Choi, they reach out and have a variety of guests. But we're crossing the border a little bit and having Judge Miles here. But Susan, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here.
Really glad to be here.
You know, glad you came over to Ramsey County, at least to the studio, for purposes of being on the show.
It's probably the one and only line I'll cross tonight.
Well, we'll wait to judge
We'll
that.
see.
I should indicate that this program is also going live into the Roseville system, so it's covering the northwest corner of Ramsey County. Tracy and I represent that part of Ramsey County, all of Ramsey County. So those watching tonight from Ramsey County, if you have questions about Ramsey County, we can't talk about pending cases. You know that from prior shows. And Judge Miles can't talk about pending cases in Washington County that she's holding. But we talked about the 10th Judicial District, and Tracy and I have it pretty easy. We only have to worry about one county.
That's right. Your geographic area is tiny compared to the one that I cover, which is 8 counties big, Washington being on what I call the eastern shore of the state of Minnesota. And we also cover, starting from the west, Sherburne, Wright, Anoka, Pine. I'm going north now and working my way down. Pine, Isani, Kennebec, Chisago, and finally Washington.
And you are chambered in Washington County.
I'm chambered in Washington, but I can be called upon to sit anywhere in the district. Back when I took the bench 18 years ago, we routinely spent a lot of time out in Sherburne and Wright in particular. Not so much anymore, but I have sat in almost all of the counties in the district, and I run district-wide.
See, I was always hoping to be assigned by the Chief Justice during the summertime to a week or two up in Pine County, because I collect agates, and I thought as long as I'd be killing time at night that I could go look for agate pits and take care of lots of things.
Well, I think as I've pointed out, just by referring to the counties, it's a very diverse district, and you can do a lot of things in Pine County that you can't do in Washington.
Or
Collecting
Ramsey.
agates would probably be one of them.
What's the most populous county?
Anoka.
Is it Anoka?
Yeah.
Okay, and how many judges sit in Anoka?
Anoka has 17. We have 10 in Washington.
Okay, all right. And then what's the smallest? Would that be?
That would be Kennebec, actually. They
And-
have one chambered judge.
Okay.
There are 2 judges chambered in Pine, and 3 in Chisago, 2 in Cambridge. And that group is what we call an assignment area. It's called the PIC group. And those judges will rotate,
Okay.
every 3 weeks or so. One of them will move so that you don't see the same face too often in one county. But we in Washington and Anoka pretty much stay put, but we can be moved back and forth as circumstances dictate, on a temporary basis anyway, to fill in if there are illnesses or shortages or any of a number of circumstances.
Now, Tracy's my chief judge, so I serve it wherever she wants to send me. Does the same thing when you go through the other counties where you could go as a your chief judge? Is there another mechanism that gets you to go someplace else?
Well, it's the chief judge who ultimately approves a plan that is put together on an annual basis by, it's usually the administrators. The administrators of each county will sit down, say 6 months before the fiscal year starts, and they'll figure out if there's a county that's underjudged and whether or not we need to send judges from other counties in to fill in those shortages. So we can and do travel.
What does underjudged mean to the people that are looking?
Well, we keep a lot of statistics, and those statistics in the end will tell us the caseloads in raw numbers, and then they'll weight the caseloads, the number of cases, based on how complex they are. And they'll come up with a formula out of those statistics that indicates how many judges you actually need to serve that caseload. And let's say in Washington, where we've got 10 chambered judges, if those statistics show that we actually need 11 judges, then we're short by a judge. And the counties in the district will work together, the administrators will work together to try and cover Washington as best they can. The other side of the example is that when I first came on board 18 years ago, Sherburne was seriously underjudged. So we in Washington actually spent 1 week out of every 9 traveling to Sherburne. So you would pack your bag, because the commute over there is just, for me, it was too much to do on a daily basis. And I would pack my bag and go over and hold court for 4 days in Sherburne.
And that's Elk River.
Right.
Okay. Washington, or the 10th Judicial District is a large district. It's not as large as many in the state. You describe what, in my world, I think is fascinating, and that's the administration of cases, making sure that there's enough judicial resources to handle the volume of cases. You can, in a district that has many counties, you can move judges around. We're just a one-county district. So consequently, we may be called on to go to other districts, and then you really do pack your bags, unless
Yes.
it's real close, but we do pack our bags, and
That has happened.
we've shared time with the 3rd Judicial District, I think, as the 10th has
We
recently.
have, yes.
And but I think it's interesting. It's interesting to see how business is done in other jurisdictions. Does business, you mentioned one county, maybe you can get away with something in Pine that you can't in Washington.
I was talking about recreational stuff.
Okay.
But you're right, each courthouse has its own culture.
Right.
They're very distinct cultures, and we do learn from each other when we travel. So I have brought ideas back and shared them with my bench, and we kick it around, and sometimes we pick them up. And likewise, people who come visit us will pick up some ideas and take them back home. So it's a good cross-pollination process.
You and I both had a good friend who's passed away, a colleague of ours, Doug Swenson, who I learned an awful lot from, but that was one thing, we talked about the uniqueness of a particular district or county and, the ability to share ideas. And boy, talk about, we do this here, or, this well, or this doesn't work so well. It really is, I think, a great way to serve the public by having those discussions and trying to improve.
Absolutely.
Tracy and I were in the same baby judge school as Doug. There
Yes, we were.
9 or 10 of us. Denise Rowley was one, several others.
Tim McManus from the first.
So, it was, we'd all been judges probably at least 4 or 5 months, some a little bit longer. And I don't know what I would have done had I gotten into a situation like Doug, where one judge, one county, everything that came in, no matter what it was put on his desk. Where in Ramsey County, they started me out, as we do most of our, I think all our judges start out in the misdemeanor beat. So if you screw up someone's 15th driving without a license, you're going to get them back in a month or two on the 16th. So you don't really lose a lot, but you kind of learn the process and how things go. But that's all you do every day.
Right.
I suspect your assignments are quite varied from day to day.
Well, and we do have a unique calendaring policy in Washington County, which we just love. And others study us and think about whether or not they want to emulate us.
That others was me. I have studied the system and
Well, and I
studied
was
it.
referring to other counties in our own district, too.
Okay.
We have a system in Washington where we've got 10 judges, and we take the entire workload, divide it up into 10 pieces, and we all rotate every week. So we don't have a system where you go to, say, misdemeanor court for a couple of years and then family court for a couple of years. We're, in the course of 10 weeks, we do it all. And then we start over again on week 1. And that means that the first year, especially, that I was on the bench just went because there was a whole lot to learn. And every week you were going to be doing something new.
The last year before I was appointed to the bench, I was primarily in the county attorney's office handling juveniles. And I remember we had a new judge just about it was more often than every week, and that was nice. That was good. I liked that system from the prosecutorial end, having the variety.
But since then, we've blocked juvenile cases for almost as long as I can remember.
Okay.
And what that means is we are assigned a juvenile, and actually we're assigned a whole family. Once the first case hits the door, either in the juvenile or the family or domestic abuse realm. So let's say, for example, John Smith comes in the door on a juvenile case. He stays assigned to us until he is out of the system. And then let's say John Smith's parents get a divorce or have a domestic abuse action between them. We get that as well, not on a juvenile calendar, on another calendar, but people in the computers keep track of who
Excellent.
Our families are. And so for better or for worse, we become intimately familiar with the circumstances of individual families. And it causes some scheduling struggles that have to be worked out sometimes, but I think most people involved in the system feel like it is so worth it, that it is worth trying to overcome the challenges.
What's fun, is when you see them all away from the bench. Oh, there's my judge.
Yeah.
Well, and I've bumped into kids downtown. And they are kids who we've spent a lot of tough moments with over time, and you've watched them struggle, and eventually get to the point where they can be discharged from probation, and you might see them on the street 6 months later, and hey, how are you doing? How's it going? And their faces light up, and it's going great.
Yeah. I thought Judge Bastian was going to tell you that he is in his second round now of leading our juvenile and family division. In the second judicial district, We operate a little differently than Washington County. We're on a block system. So what we do is have a judge assigned to a particular assignment for anywhere from 3 to 4 or 5 years. Judge Bastian is just taken over as lead judge in our juvenile and family division. This is his second round doing that. And we have a one judge, one family program for juveniles, for family type cases. The orders for protection or harassment, restraining order type cases are all blocked, so to speak, in this
Termination of parental rights could fall within
That's
that umbrella.
right. The one judge, one family, and you're right, Susan. That is, I think, a real benefit not only to us but to the families, because you do get to know them. You know
Yeah.
the uniqueness of their issues, and
Well, and then the other way that we might be slightly different from Ramsey is that we block all of our civil cases
okay,
and family cases. So what block means is that when a case comes in the door, it's assigned randomly to one of the 10 judges, and it stays with that judge for the life of the case. And since we're not rotating in and out of different courts,
right,
that means, my entire career I'll have a case, and that can happen especially in family court. So
Right.
I've actually still got some cases that I inherited from my predecessor, Judge Howard Albertson. This happens in the family arena where
Sure.
people come back on post-decree motions. So you get to know those families really well.
Did you get your cases back when you?
Well, that's where I had asked that I would go down there early,
Okay,
because when I left in 2009, Judge Cleary took over. He got appointed to the Court of Appeals. Judge Bohr replaced him, and then I replaced Judge Bohr. So the pedigree is somewhat the same, but we have a little different scheme on the post decrees, where there's a rotation of that because sometimes the pedigrees aren't very clear. So Judge Clark is down at family right now, and I have one of his cases that I have to finish up this week on post-decree, trying to interpret what he said. I was like, why didn't you give it to Judge Clark? He knew what he said, or would have a better chance of remembering what he said and wrote more than I'm ever going to do, but by luck of the draw, I got it. So.
you mentioned Judge Miles, that you replaced Judge Howard Albertson, who I remember fondly, having practiced in front of Judge Albertson for many years. He was also known as the marrying judge,
Yes.
and he was a very well-liked, very popular judge in Washington County. And I know you ran for Judge Albertson's seat.
Right.
When Judge Albertson retired, there's a number of ways you can become a judge. You can be appointed by the governor. We use a judicial selection commission here. Or if a judge's seat is vacant during an election time, then it's an open seat. And I know you ran for Judge Albertson's seat 18 years ago, and I want to talk a little bit about that.
A trip down memory lane.
Exactly. But tell us, so the viewers know, I know a little bit about you. As I said, I practiced before you when I was in the Washington County Attorney's Office. I've worked with you on many committees, and I want to make sure we have enough time to talk about that, because I knew you did a lot, and when I researched you in preparation for tonight's show, I realized, wow, you did a lot more than even I was aware. But let's talk about Susan Miles, who was in private practice. Let's start with private practice here.
Oh, let's go back beyond
Okay.
that. Where are you from?
Started in New York
Okay.
and moved around. We never seemed to stay put for more than about 7 years at a time, so we ping-ponged around the country, my family, my mother, my father, my 2 brothers and I. I'm the middle child, so sandwiched between the 2 boys. Taught me a lot of lessons early on.
Probably how to mediate or how to cause
How
trouble.
to duck.
Okay.
So that path took me from New York to New Jersey to California to Maryland. and wound up in Maryland as I was entering 10th grade, Annapolis Senior High. Finished high school at Annapolis Senior High, which was, even though we were kind of living in the burbs outside of the city limits of Annapolis, Maryland, there was, like here, a regional high school with, I think it was 2,000 kids.
Wow.
And very mixed racially, and it had its own set of problems.
Sure.
I started to learn a lot about life.
And
going to Annapolis.
you went to the U of Maryland, right?
University of Maryland. I understand you've had some previous discussions on this show about terrapins.
I was telling Judge Miles that we quizzed Judge Castro, who's a University of Maryland graduate, about what a terrapin was and the history, and she's like, well, I'm from Maryland as well, so we've already covered what a terrapin is, which is
a large turtle.
There you go.
And there was a bronze statue of one such being out in front of the library. I think that his shell was as big as this table.
Wow.
He just dominated the whole mall. But I was a commuting student there. I put myself through college and law school, so I had the whole gamut of part-time jobs, supporting myself and paying for my education. Everything from waiting tables to resident manager of a senior public housing project, to being a legal courier, to being a lounge singer. You didn't know that?
I did not know that.
Well, now with the judges' conference this year, I guess you have a new entertainment committee. What did you think you were going to be when you were at Annapolis High, or even before that? When you were growing up, what did you think you were going to be destined to do?
It depended on the day of the week. I really had my sights set on being an airline stewardess. It seemed exotic. You could travel. It was glamorous. I don't think I ever topped out at more than about 5'2" 3/4 inches, and I think back in the day they had a height limit of something like, or a minimum height limit of something like 5'4".
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
When I found that out, I was crushed. I mean, what am I going to do now?
Then what did you take up when you were at the Terrapin School? What was your major?
Consumer economics, with kind of a minor in economics. I was very interested in consumer protection issues at the time, and so I pursued that. It was a multidisciplinary field of study, so a BS degree. There were a lot of sciences involved.
Good.
And right up through the fall of my senior year, I thought I was going to go on to a graduate program in consumer economics. And I started looking around for what's next and couldn't find anything at that point that really grabbed me. And a professor who was mentoring me at the time informally just planted the seed of law school. And I looked at her like she was absolutely crazy. This was 1974, and I went, what? I don't know any female lawyers. What are you talking about? But then once I mulled it over a little bit and thought about it, the idea took root, and I was off on that track and never looked back. So,
Where did you go to law school?
Catholic University, which is in D.C., which is one of about 6 law schools in D.C.
Right.
I selected it because at the time they had a very socially progressive curriculum. And the dean of the law school was so good at developing that socially progressive curriculum that shortly after I got there, he was hired away by Legal Services Corporation to be their CEO. So we lost him. The atmosphere changed a little bit, but they still had a lot of great class offerings. The other thing is that it was remarkably well divided between genders at the time. It was almost 50% women in my entering class in 1975. So,
What about the other law schools in D.C.? That I would guess that wasn't the same.
You know, they had a higher than average enrollment of women, but not as high as Catholic U.
Good.
See, when you had mentioned that, it struck me that the practice of law and even the administration of the court system has changed considerably from just my lifetime. I graduated from William Mitchell in '74, so, and I would, you know, statistically, I'm going to guess 25 to maybe 40% of my class were women students. But we were in 3 different sections, so we never all got together at the same time.
Sure.
But it was still unusual back then to have a woman that was on the bench in any county. You think about it, Mary Lou Kloss was in Ramsey County back when we got on the bench. That would have been 97, 98. And Polly Flynn was there. And I'm Joanne Smith. So 3 out of, and I'm probably Peg Marinan, Kathy Guerin. But the percent was low for the number of judges we had. And it's been kind of really an uphill climb to get the equality. And then we still have to look at the minority representation on the benches. That is still an issue that has to be addressed. It's either going to be addressed by the voters or it's going to be addressed by the governor through the appointments. But you can only appoint people who apply. But I mean, our practice in our profession has changed considerably.
It has.
Since the early to mid '70s. It's just really changed. I know one of the Ramsey County judges took on and beat a municipal judge that would call female judges lawyerettes.
Oh, I remember.
Yeah, that was like a beehive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But and there were other issues, so I mean, it has changed considerably. And I suspect if I pin both of you down right now, you'd have a lot of stories that you could tell, and maybe you want to share just what you've seen in your careers as to what has changed.
Well, I started my practice in the administrative law area. So when I left Catholic University, I went straight from DC to Grand Forks, North Dakota, and started practicing in the area of utilities rate regulation, which meant I wasn't in front of the courts. Instead, I was going over to Bismarck and appearing in rate proceedings in front of the Public Service Commission. And they were literally the smoke-filled rooms.
Yes.
I kid you not. There was cigarette smoke in the hearing room, and I was almost always the only female in the room, right down to the court reporter. And I remember particularly one time when I was just getting ready to start cross-examining an expert witness for a utility company. And we had to exchange documents or have a few words about something. And he tried to throw me off my game by looking down at me and saying, "My, you have awfully nice eyes for an attorney."
Yeah.
Okay, guy, you just crossed the line.
How long were you in North Dakota?
For 3 years,
Okay.
3 fun-filled years.
And then where?
To Boston for a year. I worked for the National Consumer Law Center. I was providing backup support for other legal services attorneys doing utility rate regulation
Okay.
throughout the country. So I appeared in front of public utilities commissions all over the country. And what I had originally wanted to do instead of going to Boston was to go directly from North Dakota to the Minnesota Attorney General's office. But lo and behold, there was a budget crisis and a hiring freeze, so that door slammed shut.
Only temporarily, though.
Only temporarily, so I went to Boston, and then the opportunity reopened in Minnesota, and they called me up and said, "Will you still come?" And I said, "You bet."
Right. So you were in the Attorney General's office in Minnesota doing what?
Utility rate regulation.
Okay.
And I did that for about 3 years. I became head of the department that represented an agency called the Public Service Commission, or Public Service Corporation.
Okay.
It's been so long I don't even remember. It was the PSC. And their job, that was a separate agency that intervened as a separate party in proceedings before the Public Utilities Commission. So they were kind of an advocacy agency. They've since been merged into the Department of Commerce. So I did that for 3 years, and then I did a brief stint down in Colorado where I was asked to come down and be the chief counsel of the Office of Consumer Counsel, again, a utility rate regulation position. And there I got to do not only state proceedings, but we also had matters that were pending at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in DC. So back to DC a couple of times.
All right.
And then came back to Minnesota to stay.
And you were in private practice here.
Yes. Robbins, Kaplan, Miller, and Cerisi to start. I was doing business litigation there. And then I became a shareholder in a firm called Hession, Mackesy, and Soderberg, which became part of Moss and Barnett, merged into Moss and Barnett about a year after I took the bench.
We're filming live, so if you're watching on July 11th, you can call us. The number is up in the, what I would say is the upper right-hand corner, but I'm looking at it backwards. But call 651-747-3838. You have judges that are serving in both Ramsey and Washington counties. Our Washington County judge is also in other counties in the 10th Judicial District. So if you're watching, call. If you wait till tomorrow when the show is rerun, don't call. Tracy, what else?
All right, I'd like to talk to Judge Miles about a couple of things, a couple more things. Judges serve for a 6-year term, and after 6 years, we run for re-election. And Judge Miles is up for re-election this year, and you are one of a number of judges in the state of Minnesota who have an opponent. And we'll talk about that a little bit, but I want to go back, like you said, go back in time a little bit. And I think it's interesting. It's good for people to know. Susan, you've talked about your legal career. Like I said, I knew some of it, not all of it. But tell us a little bit about why you decided to run for this open seat in Washington County. Kind of why you, because to me that's the impetus, the start of this 18-year career, and I'd like you to tell us a little bit about that.
I was blessed to have a mentor when I was at Robbins, Kaplan, Miller, and Cerisi of a former judge from the 2nd District, Sid Abramson, just a wonderful human being. And I respected him a lot, and he cultivated that desire that I didn't know I had to become a judge. He was frankly somebody who modeled behavior that I thought that's where I want to be. So he stoked the fire, so to speak. And probably like everybody else, I had one or two of those bad experiences, most prominent of which was I was in federal court in the Eastern District of Michigan for 5 weeks trying an antitrust case. And we drew a judge who, let's just say, was a little tough to get along with.
For 5 weeks.
And yeah, he had an impact on that case. So I don't know, I guess looking back on it, I grew up having to react to a lot of situations that I thought were either fair or unfair. And the more I thought about this possibility, you know, this is where you get to decide what's fair and not fair. And that's really a job that I wanted to take on. And I care very deeply about the strength and health of our judicial system, and where better to cultivate that but being on the bench.
So you were elected in 1996?
Right. And
began serving in the 10th District. Tell us a little bit about, I want to talk to you about a couple of things, but any memorable cases, anything that strikes you? You know, you have such a heavy civil background, but I also appeared in front of you in both juvenile and criminal cases, and I think you had a knack for handling those cases as well. Can you want to talk about a little bit of some of the more memorable cases you've handled, or why you like a certain type of case? Maybe what sticks in your mind about?
Well, one of the big surprises to me is how much I took to juvenile court, and that's the delinquencies and the abuse and neglect cases. And you experience a whole range of emotions in juvenile court, as you both well know, from the success stories when you see somebody who comes in as a deeply troubled child with all kinds of issues. And we're fortunate enough in the state of Minnesota to have resources available to get them into counseling, get them into chemical dependency treatment, and work with the families in therapy and so forth. And for a lot of them, it works. And the day that they're successfully discharged from probation, or if it came in as an abuse and neglect case, the family becomes reunified, nothing is better. It brings a smile to my face. And then the other side of that coin is the failures, and those awful situations where you have to terminate parental rights, even though you may have a parent who is trying as best they can, but for any of a number of reasons do not get to the point where they have remedied the issues well enough to have their children reunified with them. And then you have to determine what's called permanency, whether it be termination of parental rights or transferring physical and legal custody to somebody else. Those are sad cases, and you see a lot of tears in the courtroom on those days. So those cases can be joyous. They can also be very challenging. And then on the criminal side, and criminal is another area that I really enjoy, the tough cases are the ones particularly involving child victims. And whether it be a death in an automobile accident caused by a drunk driver, and the sentencing ends up being a situation where the family comes in and they do their victim impact statements, and they can be incredibly moving and incredibly powerful. You find yourself on the bench, you can't display much, if any, emotion,
Right.
and you have to struggle through those situations. As you know, we also have 2 prisons in Washington County. That's something else that makes us very unique.
That's right.
2 maximum security prisons. One is a supermax, and those are their own separate little self-contained villages.
I'm sure they don't think of themselves as villages.
I think there you might have villages within villages, communities within villages, and people don't realize it, but the 2 prisons constitute a fairly significant part of our caseload, either on the criminal side in the form of events that happen inside of the prisons that are charged out as crimes, and then the prisoners are brought over to the district court, and they go through the same process as everybody else. To writs of habeas corpus. We get a lot of those.
Oh, I bet you do.
Yeah.
That's right.
Prisoners who file a petition saying, they've got me locked up, I'm not supposed to be here, judge, let me out. That's a full-blown civil case that you have to work through. We also get civil claims brought by prisoners, whether it be for medical malpractice or personal injury. Prisoner-on-prisoner assaults often result in civil suits by a prisoner against Department of Corrections and Prison Administration. And then you've got the interesting escape attempts. One stands out in my mind where a couple of guys thought they had it all figured out, and they got themselves into a garbage dumpster. And the dumpster was collected by, a regular waste management type of truck. And maybe they didn't think this through, but once the dumpster gets put into the contents are put into the truck, there's a compressor that's activated.
Yeah.
And so that compressor was activated, and they had to either die in the garbage truck or make their presence known, which they did, and then they got charged with attempted escape.
One of the last cases I had as a prosecutor before going on the bench in Ramsey County, and as I said, I worked in Stillwater as a prosecutor, but I lived in Ramsey County, which is why I eventually was appointed in the 2nd District, but I had homicide. It was I believe it was a stabbing or a fight where one of the inmates died. It was inmate on inmate. I don't think there hasn't been a homicide for a while, I don't think.
Yeah, I think somebody just pled guilty to a homicide in the
Okay.
prison not too long ago.
All right.
As you were talking about your 2 prisons that captivate a lot of your assignments in Washington County, the 10th Judicial District has Rush City and Lino Lakes and St. Cloud. So you have more than a majority of the adult male correctional institutions in the state of Minnesota.
Right.
And I think Sandstone is just outside that. That's a federal facility.
Correct.
So there's a lot of work that can come out of those prisons.
That's right.
Yeah.
I don't know how much work the federal prisons generate for the federal courts. I'm willing to bet that anything that happens there doesn't go into the state courts, but
Sometimes we end up with prisoners or inmates that for some reason get assigned there. It might be it's too risky to put them into a state institution. Why it's any better going to a federal one, I don't know, but I can think of one of our local attorneys that was prosecuted, found guilty, and went to Sandstone rather than correctional, state correction.
I thought it was a federal prosecution, but I'm not sure. You know, we talked a lot about your work in the 10th District, but one of the areas, Susan, when I worked with you the most, I think, has been on the Minnesota District Judges Association. And I'd like you to tell I know you're a past president of that organization, and what I think is significant about that is that's judicial leadership statewide. And there's approximately, 289 district court judges. We also have appellate court judges and Supreme Court judges who can be members of MDJA.
right.
But if you would, describe a little bit about what the Minnesota District Judges Association is, what you did for the association, what that involved. Because I know it also involved a connection with another branch of government, and that's the legislative branch. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because I will tell our viewers that I had to testify in front of a committee at the legislature this last session. And I got Judge Miles' notes from when she had to do it a few years before, and
I didn't know they were going to take on a life of their own.
she gave me her notes. It was very helpful. I had all the protocols correct, and so I appreciate that. But why don't you explain a little bit about what the Minnesota District Judges Association is and your role in that?
Well, the District Judges Association is, in essence, the trade association for the district judges statewide. I think we've got about a 99% membership participation rate, and our concerns deal with things like how we are selected and elected. That's been a hot button issue. Issues regarding whether or not we have enough judges to fill the need in the state of Minnesota. Pay scales for both judges as well as staff. And also during my tenure, we got involved in things. It was in a leaner time, and a time when state court administration was revamping itself, and we were taking a look at the extent to which we needed to start providing, sharing services across district lines, so that we weren't just 10 little silos. And interestingly, when I took office, I had some folks approach me from outstate or greater Minnesota saying, with these issues going on statewide about how we're going to share and distribute services across district lines, we see a real possibility of a split between greater Minnesota judges and metro judges. And that was very concerning to me. So I did form a committee with people on it from all of the districts to sit down and share our ideas as well as the challenges that we faced so that we could come up with some recommendations of our own to the body that was considering the possible changes, which is the Judicial Council. I also had a seat on the Judicial Council as MDJA's representative. So
You keep saying representative. You were the president.
I
of
was the president, yeah. Yeah. As the president, I had a seat on the Judicial Council. So that was 2 years of going to St. Paul for meetings of this. Judicial Council is a statewide body that determines policy for the entire judicial branch, and it's comprised of the chief judges of all 10 districts and 5 judges appointed at large by our Chief Justice, Lori Gilday. And we've got some administrative members on there and the president of MDJA, and I think I've and some Supreme Court and Court of Appeals
Correct.
representatives.
Correct.
So you talked about the silos, 10 different silos, but in reality, and we found this when we started doing the JDAI project, Juvenile Detention Alternative, that corrections, community corrections had a different silo. Our St. Paul Police Department had a different silo. Sheriff had it, we had it, the different suburban communities, the school districts. So when you're looking at how you're going to deliver justice and the programming, you talked about the mental health, the drug and alcohol treatment, and just supervision, that you couldn't talk to each other. And so we had 10 judicial districts, but even those judicial districts all had a different architecture and a different system, and we had to change that.
Right.
The system had to change it. So we talk about the Judicial Council as something that we all assume has always been there. But it just in our terms, since we got all elected or appointed, the governance of the judicial branch has actually changed.
Right.
And it's, people may still argue whether it's good or bad. It is what it is, and the legislature does set our budget. And even though we're a separate and equal branch of government, and they give us the money after budget hearings, the governor either accepts it or rejects it, and then it goes to the Judicial Council. So you want to talk to, both of you have been very involved in that process, but maybe just talk a little bit about how the money filters out to the different judicial districts for different functions and what statewide programs. One thing I wrote down early on, come back to because you both have experience at level, just the computer system. And we think computers make us better and faster, but sometimes they're also the bane of our existence because they punch the button and it hasn't been updated and it loses whatever you've done.
Well, I've got to start that conversation by saying that the administrative side of this job has changed radically over 18 years. When I came in the door, every piece of work we did was on paper and it had human beings. Every piece of work was being processed by human beings. We had an ancient case management system on the computers. You could track computer files on the computer and you could do some scheduling on the computers. But when I walked in the door in Washington County, we had 60 employees in court administration. I think right now we have about 44 in court administration. We are one of the lead counties, one of the pilot counties in implementing the electronic filing system. We're now doing almost all of our work in Washington County on the computer. And we elected to be a pilot county so that we could be in communication with state court administration about what works and what doesn't work, because we think we're pretty good at pinpointing issues and delineating what needs to be fixed, and we'll work with state court administration to fix it. So it's been a struggle. When we first started the pilot project, we thought we were just going to go lockstep down this time frame, and we were going to be doing all of our criminal files within a year. electronically. Well, a funny thing happened on the way to the forum, and there were a lot more issues identified than people ever expected. So we were able to disengage from that prescribed time plan, and now we're just implementing as we are ready to implement. Out of this whole process, I think, has begun a discussion, and again, MDJA has been involved in this. Judges are now much more deeply involved in the whole technology discussions than we were previously. And MDJA formed its own technology committee, and State Court Administration had its own technology committee, while ultimately
we're all working together.
Wise heads got together, and those committees were merged, and things are going about as smoothly as they can, and people are listening to the ideas.
I think the federal system was, what, 10 years ahead of the state system in electronic filing and in the whole e-world, we call it, e-court, but in computerization and everything else. And we, in a sense, modeled ourselves after the federal system, but you know, there were some kinks, some bugs to work out, and you know, I think one of the interesting things that Judge Miles pointed out is things are different in outstate Minnesota, and when I say outstate Minnesota, I'm talking about more rural counties than in metropolitan areas. I have learned. I've been on the Judicial Council for 2 years, and I have learned a tremendous amount about what goes on in other districts. And I'm not saying by any stretch that one is better than the other. It's just different. And people learn. You know, give an example. There are some historic courthouses out there that are not set up for anything electronic. I mean, they literally have had to have been completely rewired. The benches are not set up for computer monitors. Mm-hmm. So this technology advancement, the administration, as you said, of the way we do our business, has changed dramatically. But facilities also have had to change. It's
Sure.
just been a major sea change. And
well, and we're lucky that we within the last 3 years completed construction of a new courthouse in Washington County, and I was one of the lead judges on that project. So we were able to see technology coming when we planned out the courtrooms, and we have little wells in the bench where we can put the monitors so that the monitor is not sitting right up in front of our faces while we're trying to look at a jury or a witness. Well, one of the points here is there's e-filing is one thing, and I think that's what the federal system implemented about 10 years ago, but we're now at the point where we're literally conducting all of our business from the bench by computer. And it takes a special set of skills to just sit back and let go as you watch that computer screen freeze up, or your clerk says, "Sorry, Judge, I can't print this order because the computer's not working," or "I can't even get anything up on my monitor." You know, you're hamstrung on those days, or the servers go down in St. Paul or Anoka. So it's a whole new set of issues. I think in the end, we're going to look back on the old paper file days. You know, we would bring those stacks of files
Sure.
onto the bench like that, and we're shuffling through the paper looking for stuff while we're trying to maintain eye contact with people in front of us. And we'll look back on those days and say that was kind of crazy. Yeah. But we're still going through that transition. It's a struggle, and we have to be patient when things don't work like they're supposed to.
But we've traded that paper file where you think people are thinking, "Oh, what are they doing looking at the cartoon pages?" But same thing with the computer. I often just explain to people that, you know, hold up and say, "I have the calendar page, but I don't have your file." Mm-hmm. And I need to look at your file, and that means I have to go on to the computer. Mm-hmm. So if it looks like I am sending emails out and laughing with friends, I'm really trying to get your paperwork up. Yeah. And so I can, you know, I've read it before, but now as you're arguing different things, I want to just verify and have it in front of me. And that is a big issue for people, because you can look at them and they're looking at you like, why are you on the computer?
But that's a good point. When I open court, I mention that many times. I do not have any paper here. Everything is in this screen, so I'm going to be looking at the screen and maybe not at you. And that's a whole sea change, because I'm used to looking at people and when they speak to me, but if they're referring to something that I don't have in my hand, but it's on the screen and my screen may be off to the side, you're not looking at them. I need to, we're closing in on the end of the show, and this is a good segue, Judge Miles, because some of this causes stress in our lives. And people have different ways of dealing with stress, and I want you to talk about a little bit. You've got a recent certification, and I just find this very unique, very wonderful, but I'd like you to tell our viewers a little bit about what you do in the stress release world. If that's the right...
What Judge Warner is referring to is a program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, and thank you for the award of the certification, but I'm not quite there yet. It's a pretty stringent training program, and I am a teacher in training at the University of Minnesota Center for Spirituality and Health. I'll take you back to about 2006. I had to come to grips with the fact that I was struggling with emotions on and off the bench, being driven in large part by casework,
Right.
one or two cases in particular, budget crisis,
Right.
hiring freeze, no law clerk. You know, it was a perfect storm of stuff. And I said, I got to do something here. So I happened across a course in something called mindfulness meditation in community education in public Forest Lake.
Okay.
So I took up the practice of mindfulness meditation, which is what it suggests, meditation, sitting on a cushion for half an hour at a time. And there are many different kinds of meditation. This particular kind involves noting what's going on in your brain, in your mind, and letting it go, and or experiencing it in your body. So I did this practice for the better part of about 5 years and really did not talk about it around the courthouse very much, thinking, okay, this may sound a little weird to some people. But then, as you know, in the last couple of years, mindfulness issues have really gone mainstream, and it's due in large part to the work of a gentleman out on the East Coast named John Kabat-Zinn, and buttressed by a lot of scientific findings coming from fMRI studies. And so, having found my way into that program, I love it. I want to take it out to judges and lawyers and teach it to fellow members of a very stressful profession.
You've been doing some of that, and I know...
I just want to follow up quick, because we're probably down to about 30 seconds, but is part of your mindfulness, do you do tapping, where you're releasing the energy points within your body? Have you gotten into that part of it?
No, that's a different flavor.
There's a woman that operates a clinic down in Stillwater area that she does community ed programs. So it's probably a point where we get to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank Tracy for being my co-host. It was great having you here, learning a little bit about you. Yep,
Thanks.
didn't know about your public utility thing. I was going to ask you questions about fracking, but that was probably a different thing.
Different era. Yeah.
Different era, different time. So anything in closing you'd like to say?
Great to be here, and I love my job, and can't imagine myself doing anything else.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Susan. Appreciate you being here. And thanks for having me as well.
You're welcome. So if you're still listening to us, the Ramsey County Fireworks Show is tonight. Go out by Goodrich Golf Course and watch a great fireworks show about 10 o'clock. Thanks for being with us tonight.